Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite. Esta é mais uma edição de Pedro+Cora, aquele seu programa que só fala de tecnologia. Você sabe que a gente só fala de tecnologia porque você fica com essa coisa de que a gente fala de outro assunto que não tecnologia, porque hoje nós vamos falar de tecnologia. Uma quedinha para as humanidades, Mas Pedro+Cora, como você sabe, toda terça-feira, toda quinta-feira no canal do Meio no YouTube ou então na sua plataforma favorita de podcasts. Eu sou o Pedro Doria. Ao meu lado está minha queridíssima amiga Cora Rónai. Cora, a gente vai falar de tecnologia, né?
Olha, não só vamos falar de tecnologia, como temos um convidado de tecnologia, ó. Diferente.
Paddy Cosgrave. Quem é Paddy Cosgrave?
É o CEO e fundador do Web Summit.
Web Summit, o principal grande evento de tecnologia da Europa, que costuma acontecer em Lisboa, nos últimos anos tem acontecido em Lisboa, e que vai ter a sua primeira edição latino-americana. Está rolando nessa semana na cidade do Rio de Janeiro. E olha, esse é só o primeiro Web Summit do Rio, então vamos lá. Mr. Cosgrave, thank you for being in our show. Can we call you Paddy?
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic,
do. Yeah.
fantastic. So, I mean, there's one inevitable question we should start with. Why holding the first Web Summit outside of Europe in Rio?
Why not? I think is the first answer. But
I mean, I'm from here, so
yeah, I remember in 2016 when we decided to move Web Summit to Lisbon, the reaction from a lot of people was, "Oh, come on! It's not even a serious European business city. It's a holiday destination. It's not even a major European city. It's outside the top 10. What about London? What about Berlin?" And at the time, Web Summit was growing very fast. And we just thought that Lisbon had this mix of charm, sun in November, which most of Europe is pretty miserable by the time you get to November, especially northern Europe. There was a good startup zeitgeist that hadn't been written about at that point. And so we got a lot of negative coverage initially in the press, and then we brought journalists from all over Europe, and slowly, certainly in Europe and then eventually further afield, people began to fall in love with Lisbon as a kind of startup city. And now you look at some of the rankings, Lisbon would never appear in any rankings for digital nomads or places where people want to start companies. And it's now often ranked number 1, number 2, number 3, depending on the rankings you look at. And when we were watching over the last number of years, about 5 years, the participation from Latin America in Web Summit, Brazil used to be like 2 or 3 Brazilians, and then it became 30, and then it became 300, and then it became 3,000, and it led Latin America by far. There could be a number of reasons for that, but it's not even, Argentina and Mexico aren't even close. So there was no question if we were to do an event in Latin America, it was going to be in Brazil, and then the only question was what city. We discounted early on, even though there was a lot of I think, approaches and suggestions we should go to Sao Paulo. Our model in Europe was to avoid the biggest kind of cities, the biggest business cities. And thereafter, we got down to a short list of 3 cities that were all bidding for it, which was Porto Alegre, Brasilia, and Rio. And, in the end, Brasilia offered the most inducements or incentives to go there. I think a lot of people would have seen it as perfect for its location for Latin America, but I think Rio beats it on lots of other grounds. So that's kind of the long story as to why we're here.
So again,
I think you have chosen wisely.
I mean, we are both from Rio, so we shouldn't have an opinion on that. Yeah. We are biased.
I am biased.
Yeah, we are both.
Well, I think if people are going
so it comes back to the charm.
Yeah. I mean, if people are going to travel from 4 corners of the world, and we've got attendees already in the first year from nearly 100 countries, or thereabouts, they might as well come to a beautiful, vibrant city, and that to me is, I think, is Rio. There's lots of other great cities. I'm not saying they're negative or anything, but I just think Rio stands out.
I was in vacations in Lisbon when you had the first Web Summit.
No way. Wow.
Yeah, and I was kind of flabbergasted, perhaps, like Web Summit in Lisbon. It was like, because Lisbon at the time had it had the least technology apparatus of any European city. Nobody associated Lisbon with
it's just tourism.
Something technological. Yeah. Barcelona, instead, is very, very forward and very up to date. But Lisbon, why Lisbon? And you changed Lisbon in a way, because I remember the way people thought about that first Web Summit, and even the people I was talking with and my friends, they are not from the technology field. They were like a little bit taken aback, why is this technology people coming here, because they had never heard about things. And now I think people think a lot about Lisbon as a technological alternative. Do you think this can, in a way, happen here in Rio?
Well, I think it's already happening, anyway. And then secondly, Rio has hosted some of the world's biggest events. So, in some ways, it's a massive global city, super cosmopolitan, long history of hosting everything from the World Cup to the Olympics. So it has all of the ingredients. The arc with Lisbon was when we arrived, young people were leaving, and nobody cool or techie was moving to Lisbon. And then, in the first kind of year or two, suddenly there was, cool people are moving to Lisbon, tech people are moving to Lisbon. Now it's, if you read about it, we're quite careful how we discuss it, because so many people have moved to Lisbon and so many people with money have moved to Lisbon that it is also creating challenges, serious challenges for the city and for the government. These aren't, if a city is decaying, that's also a problem, and it's a problem that's very difficult to solve because the city doesn't have any money. The city of Lisbon has a lot of money, but there's a lot of problems with the cost of rent for people that are born in Lisbon. But that hopefully the government will be able to address. As regards Rio over the next few years, I can't say, and I don't want to predict either. You just never know. But I think in a world where people can work from anywhere, they choose to. You can see it. People choose to work in beautiful places with an amazing balance of life. I think Lisbon has benefited from that massively, and I think somewhere like Rio as well should benefit from that. There's an abandonment in the United States of a lot of cities, and people are just moving to nicer places to live individually, to raise a family, and perhaps Rio is, I'd like to hope, will benefit from that. But it's already massive, it's already very cosmopolitan. So.
Since the beginning, you guys started using AI in the conference business, from dispersing lines as fast as you could, and distributing people around tables, and even deciding who are the best speakers for a conference, the people folks wanted to hear from. How's this been going? How have you been using it now?
Yeah, it has been at the core of of Web Summit for more than, it's nearly a decade now. It started with 3 former academic physicists who had taught in a number of different universities around the world, in Berlin, TU, and some other ones. They're still working kind of at Web Summit because it is a fun challenge, experimentally even, to bring 5,000 people together and to subtly get certain people to meet certain people. In 2014-15, we used to talk about it, but then I think people got very freaked out about data, maybe manipulation of data, or a feeling that When you open the Web Summit app, the version of Web Summit you see is entirely personalized to you. The people that you're being recommended to meet and the people you are being recommended to on other people's phones is entirely unique, and it's changing all the time. So we don't talk about it so much anymore. It's just this invisible hand that's, in theory, trying to get you to meet people that we think algorithmically or statistically should meet. But also the way the recommendations for people work is we show you people that we think you know already, that you might want to meet, and then we interleave it with recommendations of people that you likely don't know, but we think you should meet. That's different to almost all social networks. Try to suggest to you people that you already know in your existing social life, like Facebook, for example. And we're trying to do something a little bit different, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work correctly. I'll give you an example of it not working correctly. So we changed it's called a recommender system. So it generates recommendations. We made some modifications to it. And on the first night of Web Summit, maybe it was 2017 or 2018, around 8 o'clock, recommendations became highly genderized in the evening, because effectively there seemed to be, the pattern was men were overwhelmingly looking at female profiles. And the algorithm learned that men must now want to see more female profiles.
Oh, wow.
And we had to manually interrupt and freeze the system until we fixed it. Maybe it's just a terrible window into human psychology or the behavior of men. But so there's lots of examples of it not working particularly well. Another example, there's a Twitter storm thread about it, was a man and a woman who had been married, both in tech. They had divorced each other, had not engaged with each other or spoken to each other for over half a decade, came to Web Summit, and both of their top recommendations of who to meet were each other.
Oh, wow.
And, so the algorithm in theory is working, but in that instance, it's not actually it wasn't a good recommendation.
It lacks some sensitivity, let's say.
Yeah, it's like AI in general. It doesn't really know what it's doing, it can't really. But yeah, so it's been, it's helpful. I mean, people go to events in our view. Speakers are of course very important, and exhibitors are very important, but really people are going to meet people. Not absolutely everybody, but most people are going for some professional, sometimes personal reasons to meet old friends or connect with new people that could be interesting or could be valuable in some way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because you had a very bad time during the pandemic, like everybody else.
Yeah.
But of course, being an event where people go and meet, it was tough. But do you think, this is one question, but with two sides. One, if you are going to use some of the online technology that you developed during the pandemic from now on, and how did it come back? Was it good to come back? People enjoyed coming back to?
Good question. So we were very lucky that our largest team in the company builds software, and they build software for our events. So when the pandemic happened, we added the features to our, called it platform, to allow the event to be 100% online. And then we started licensing that software to other events, small events, United Nations events, and CES used our platform to run its event in 2002, I guess, which was last year. But in the end, we took the view that online events is just not what we do. We took some of the features, of course, and if you buy a ticket to Web Summit and you can't make it, you can experience most of the event in a somewhat useful way online. But generally, as a a company, we just aren't all that positive on online events. We think they have a role to play, but it's not what we do. I just don't. I'm not casting judgment on online events. I'm just saying that, you know, for us, it's not really what we see as valuable. I hope that answers your question.
And did people come back in the number you expected after the pandemics?
Yeah, they did. I mean, in last year was the first time we sold out Web Summit more than a day or two in advance. So we stopped selling tickets about 3 weeks in advance. I mean, overall, there seems to be almost an unexplained increase in participation in real world events. But I think if you look at the pattern of people purchasing, which we've seen a very significant increase in people buying group packages. Because people are working increasingly in tech remotely, and for companies or for teams, they still need to meet at some point during the year together, either as an entire company or maybe as a team. And as a consequence, I think some events have benefited. At the same time, lots of tech events, you know, went bankrupt, closed, stopped because of the pandemic, and they never came back. So it may also be the case that the remaining tech conferences at scale have benefited from a couple of these different phenomenon. I'm not entirely sure. I don't have a proven working thesis, but that's some of my thoughts on why the return to real world events has been so pronounced for us. Yeah.
What are the hot topics for Rio's Web Summit?
There's 3. AI.
Of course.
AI and AI.
I wouldn't have guessed.
I know.
No,
Yeah.
this becomes a surprise.
I know. It will be. You know, I'm not an AI expert. I think I've, you know, like you guys, been around for a while, and you become a little bit. When you see a lot of hype, partly your job is to be a little bit kind of skeptical of the hype. So I'm not an AI expert. Those people will be on stage. And I'm sure those discussions will be robust because we're at a point maybe in the hype cycle where journalists will feel a little bit more comfortable going, okay, we've seen some cool images and, you know, interesting essays written by AI, but, you know.
Well, but at the same time, there is a difference, right? I mean, in the last years, over, I don't know, the last 5 years, we've talked a lot about crypto, about Web3, about the metaverse, and most of the people haven't really seen anything about crypto or, well, perhaps people have bought some Bitcoins or something, but that's just about it. It was always about a promise. While with generative AI, suddenly it's all over the place, and people are using ChatGPT and are using Midjourney and the likes, and suddenly people are writing code on GitHub using AI, and I mean. It's not vaporware. It's there. It's different in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, it does seem to be kind of interesting use cases. I really pushed for the last speaker at Web Summit in November to be Noam Chomsky and Professor Gary Marcus from NYU because I was quite interested whenever there's a lot of hype, and I mean the hype has only got greater since they spoke. I'm interested in finding the dissenters, those that are a little bit more cautious. And both Chomsky and Marcus are cautious as scientists, I think, with a reasonable understanding of the field.
Of how language works.
Yeah. And, Chomsky's 94.
Chomsky is the dissenter by excellence.
Yeah, but
show him something and he will dissent immediately.
That is true. That is true. But if we are talking linguistics, he actually has a lot of scientific knowledge about
it. He does. I'm not questioning that.
Yeah. So, I think these are interesting. It's interesting to consider these viewpoints, and I remain. I guess 10 years ago, I was being told directly by certain people that driverless cars were 6 months away. In fact, people were making these pronouncements. There are YouTube videos, and they were making these claims roughly every 6 months. And then I did eventually. I have a Tesla, and I live far into the countryside in Ireland, and I can't use it. It will kill me.
Well, it has killed people.
I know it has, and I love some of the applications. I kind of can't stop eating and consuming all the tweet threads showing the amazing applications of, in particular in the last few weeks, AutoGPT. My feeling is that no company is likely to monopolize or oligopolize AI, that the advances ultimately will be a public good because the underlying mathematics is not proprietary. Sometimes the data sets may be, but I have a feeling in the end it will be almost like the web itself, and the contribution of Tim Berners-Lee, which was, it just ends up being a universal kind of public good. And that would be kind of an amazing thing. And AutoGPT in some ways just kind of an open source repo on GitHub, and it does phenomenal things. And that part I quite like, but I just don't like the idea of some Terminator-style Skynet controlling ultimately the most powerful AI system in the world.
I want to come back to the Web Summit and people attending the Web Summit, because there's been such a huge quantity of layoffs in the tech industry recently. Did this affect Web Summit or other events?
Yeah, no, 100% should be affecting a Web Summit. And I think the presumption for us internally, because this started happening 18 months ago, and when we worked out a partnership with the city, we agreed to 5,000 people in the first year, which, internally felt a little bit of a stretch, but that was what we were going to try and pull off. And then, it reached a point maybe 6 months ago where we notified the city, the mayor's office, that we thought, look, possibly actually 7,500 people. And they're like, oh, that's great, 50% more. That's fantastic. And then we get back, we're like 10,000, and then we're like 15,000. And I think eventually the mayor's office were like, oh, these Web Summit people can't predict anything. And eventually you get too close to the event. You have to sign contracts with all of the suppliers for an event. You need so much fencing, you're getting so many seats, the stages are this size. You're too close, and you eventually you have to set a certain size, and literally in a 3 or 4 day period, tickets just jumped by 3,000 or 4,000, and we just had to stop selling tickets. And it's odd. And so the question is, what's driving it? And again, you can only have a working thesis. You can't say anything for sure. We can have a sense for what's happening. I think there's a couple of things happening. Firstly, in Latin America, I don't think it matters that Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. I don't think it matters that American VCs in particular have sort of frozen up and are not funding startups, mainly because a lot of those leading funds never invested or only invested very recently in Latin America. So it just doesn't matter to entrepreneurs that are not investing currently. The second thing is many of the smartest people in tech were gainfully employed for the best part of the last 2 decades inside many of the largest tech companies. And when every major tech company and high growth company, it seems, is doing mass layoffs, sometimes repeated layoffs, and there's now hundreds of thousands of people out there looking for their next gig. And a lot of the major tech companies aren't hiring and the unicorns aren't hiring. I think that pushes a lot of these very smart, wealthy, independently wealthy people towards possibly starting companies. Will 1% of the 250,000, 300,000 people laid off just in Silicon Valley, will they start companies? I think so. That's possibly thousands of companies started by a generation.
That's actually what actually happens in these cycles in Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, and so that's what I think is happening. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far, but I have a bunch of other hunches that. So in theory, there's never been so much dry powder in venture capital in history, but at the same time, it's never been cheaper to start a company. On top of that, many of those starting companies are in their 30s, they're in their 40s. Some of them will be being paid insane amounts of money to just stay inside Google or stay inside Facebook for years and years. You know, I know some of these people, they don't need to take any outside capital. They can spend the next year with a small team of 5, 6, 7 people getting to product market fit, signing their first customers. And I think what you also might see is a generation of bootstrapped or near bootstrapped software startups, which will be categorically different from effectively the last decade that was all hyper growth fueled by gigantic amounts of venture capital. Now, I could be totally wrong. These are just my kind of hunches.
Where are people coming from? It's mostly Latin America.
Yeah, every single. Well, I'm from Europe. Every single European country is represented, not just with entrepreneurs, but with trade delegations. Almost every European country has a pavilion at the event. Every large one: Germany, France, Spain, Great Britain. The only one not there is Italy. But that's some would say nothing surprising.
But why?
I shouldn't criticize the Italians. They're amazing Italian companies, but sometimes in tech they've been the laggard of all of the larger nations in Europe. And I think to me that represents this immense shift that's happening in the world. That we take a Web Summit to Latin America, and it's quite clear, I think, certainly to every country in Europe that it's not just that Brazil is growing fast, it's that there's a kind of very clear sort of new world order emerging, and Europe, needs to make an effort to get out and participate and be in all of these other markets. And it's the same with our events elsewhere in the world. We've got an event in the Middle East next year, and then we have an event in Asia as well.
That's interesting. Why don't you evolve a bit on this idea? And how would you characterize this new world order which could be appearing?
500 years of Western imposed imperialism. Each version of it, we promised whoever we were sort of conquering or controlling that we were doing it because we had great values. So, we went wherever in the world and we said, we got great values for you. Here's a Bible. We'll take all the gold. Then we're like, here's a contract. We'll give you a loan. Now we'll take all your natural resources. So, the version of it has iterated for 500 years. And then suddenly, like it almost seems in 2023, the way history sometimes it takes decades for change to happen. On Monday, 19 countries applied to join the BRICS. Things are happening very, very fast. You've got peace in the Middle East. You've got all of these currency agreements being signed between major trading nations. there's so much happening. It's almost very difficult. I find it difficult to kind of stay on top of what's happening. And for me, that represents monumental shift. And then it's unclear to me exactly, as a European, where Europe is going to fit in. I feel strongly that Europe is going to move away from the United States and stop being so subservient to the interests of the United States. And I think that's probably a kind of a positive thing for the world. There seems to be a desire in the United States to create two worlds, one world which is Europe and the United States, where Europe has to buy terrible and expensive American crap and can't buy stuff from China and some other places, and that would just be a bad idea for Europe. So,
do you think that it still makes sense to make this kind of universal event instead of localized events? Because we're talking about everybody being present in Rio, but there is this Web Summit in Lisbon.
Yeah.
Now you have a Web Summit in Rio.
Yeah.
Isn't it really the way to go? Like having an event in Asia, as you said, another in the Middle East.
Well, yeah. I mean, over the last number of years, the participation in Web Summit from outside of Europe has grown quite substantially. And I think from a brand point of view, we have an obligation to go to markets that are interesting, where there's a lot of growth. But I also think a lot of our core attendees and companies that participate in the event also have an interest in going to markets where there's a lot happening, whether that's in the Middle East or Latin America or in China, for example. So that's the world's a pretty big place with 8 billion people, and yeah, I'm surprised how many countries will be represented at the first Web Summit in Rio, because to me it's more of a demonstration effect. I think we have to show that we can do a good event in Rio, and then I think a lot more people will travel from around the world. I'm sure there's a lot of people, even though there's a lot of people coming, I'm sure there's a lot more people who are like, it's the first year, let's see how it goes. And if it goes well, which I think it will, then who knows how many people will come next year.
So there will be a Web Summit Rio next year?
Yes, yeah. We're here for at least 3 years and probably 6 years. So that's the current status.
So by the numbers you're seeing right now, you believe it will be at least a 6-year run?
I think that's very likely, because I would feel that sometimes you don't know your cards until you turn them over. And we've turned over the first card and it's like, ooh, that's an ace of spades. So it's a good, it looks like people want to come here, and then let's see next week. We have no major issues so far constructing the venue. That was definitely a concern, because we're using suppliers, production companies that we've never used before. But I think the fact that Rio has held so many huge global events means that these companies are totally professional and used to operating at scale.
If someone wanted to attend the Web Summit, let's imagine someone is listening to us and says, oh, I have to go to the Web Summit. Are there still any tickets, or what should this person do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sadly, there are no tickets, and we just can't give out more tickets. But you can watch the center stage on our website. That's about it, I'm afraid, for this year. But next year, just you can buy a ticket on the website, or if you're a student, you can apply for the scholarship program. There's lots of students who would love to go, but for different reasons, they may not have the resources to be able to go. You could be an engineer, a software engineer, and you may not have the resources to go. You can apply for a developer ticket, so for 2024. So it'll be till 2024, unfortunately.
Paddy, thank you so much for this conversation, and believe me, we are eager to talking to you next year.
Thank you very much.
Yes. We will already put it in our
calendars.
In our calendars.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure.
Good. Great.